Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on our third session as part of Career Ready Week. Today's session is looking at your cover letter and your CV. So my name is Shahida Aslam. I'm the Director of Operations for the Helena Kennedy Foundation. A very warm welcome to you. So today, today's session is going to be facilitated by Liz Watt. And in the session, Liz will be looking at the different types of CV, how you can showcase your strengths and skills in your CV, the structure and content of it, and also crafting a good personal statement and pitfalls to avoid when writing a CV. And this is being recorded, and at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a laptop, there is a Q&A section and a chat section. So feel free to introduce yourself in there and pop any questions in there. And by way of introduction, I'd like to introduce you to Liz Watt. Liz is an executive career and personal development coach, and operating through her business, Liz Watt Coaching, which she established in 2021. Until the end of 2020, she was a managing director of a London-based recruitment business and enjoyed a successful career as a recruitment consultant and executive coach. She runs women's networking groups and offers pro bono career coaching to individuals at an early career stage. And at the Helena Kennedy Foundation, Liz also kindly mentors our bursary as well. So that's enough from me, and over to you now, Liz.
Right, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Shahida, for that introduction. And welcome, as Shahida said, to this third of this sessions of this Career Ready Week. I'm really delighted to be here and to present to you this morning. Our session will be around about half an hour of presentation, and then there'll be plenty of opportunity for questions afterwards. Without further ado, let's look at what we're going to be covering today in our session. So firstly, I'm going to look at skills and strengths, and I'll briefly touch upon the difference between skills and strengths and how you can use these to construct your CV. Then we'll look at the different types of CV, and you'll see that depending on the role that you're looking to apply for, there are options as to how you present your information. Then we'll look at personal statements and why you might want to include one in your CV, and we'll move on to structure and content. And I'll give you some ideas on what you might like to think about in terms of presentation, which is just as important as the content, to be honest. And then we'll look at cover letters and how to structure one and what content to include. And then finally, what to avoid. What are the pitfalls and the areas that you should really look out for when you're putting all of this together. And then, as I say, there'll be time for questions at the end. So your CV is quite often the very first way that a prospective employer will hear of you. It's the first introduction. It therefore has to create a positive impact and leave a lasting impression. We'll call these the 3 I's. And during this workshop, we'll look at the ways you can work on these 3 I's: your introduction, your impact, and creating a lasting impression for all the right reasons. When writing a CV, it's a really common mistake to create just one CV and send this out regardless of the job or the employer. And this is a mistake that could mean that you miss out on a great opportunity, as your CV doesn't match the expectations and the position you're applying for, or the style and culture of the business. In this case, one size definitely doesn't fit all. So tailoring your CV is really essential. And the more thought and effort you can put into this, the better. Your CV needs to match the job description and the job requirements. So you might need to adapt your template and the content you include to reflect this. And so I have a question for you. How long do you think it's the average time that someone will take to look at your CV in the first instance? You might be very surprised to know that the average time a recruiter will spend looking at your CV is 8 seconds. So not very much, I think you'll agree. The HR professionals, or whoever is doing that first sift, will have a huge number of CVs to process, more than likely. And therefore, they'll be looking at reasons to reject CVs, not to arrange an interview, because they just want to get that pile of CVs down. They'll have limited time to process this large number of applicants. So your objective should be to produce a CV that stands out for all the right reasons and not to give the assessor an easy excuse to reject it. So it's vital that you make your seconds count. So when putting together the CV and before launching into writing it, I'd urge you to take a few minutes to step back and think about your strengths and your skills, those things that really make you unique, because these are the ones that you want to use as the platform for your CV. So first, let's consider strengths. These are generally considered to be something that you're naturally good at. They're part of who we are, our strengths, you know. So maybe you're brilliant at organising, or maybe you're really good at presenting or public speaking. Whatever these are, these strengths come naturally to you. And also there are character strengths. So things like honesty, empathy, courage, emotional intelligence, part of what makes you you. And then your skills. So these tend to be things that you gain with experience, or that you learn, or that you might be working on to develop and make better. So for example, you might be learning how to code, or you might be very good at languages and you're developing your skills in this area. So whatever it is, I'd suggest you spend some time really thinking about your key strengths and skills before embarking upon this CV writing, how you might demonstrate them, and examples of when you've used these skills and strengths, so that you can articulate this very clearly. As I say, these are the platform on which you're going to build your CV. And looking at a CV that is based on a skills and strengths based CV, this is an example of one that you can use. I think that the skills and strengths based CVs are really good to use if you're, for example, just leaving college or university, and you've got limited work experience. So you want to focus in on the things that really demonstrate what you can do in the absence of lots of work experience. It can also be appropriate if you're looking for a job that's unrelated to your degree or academic background. The skills and strengths you highlight in this type of CV are transferable, and to different roles and different employers, different environments. And this type of CV enables you to really focus in on the skills you've developed in the various areas of your life and the strengths that really exemplify you. The key is to focus on skills and strengths that are appropriate to the position you're applying for. And if you're using this CV template, I'd suggest you include a real mixture of both. It's important when you're doing this to position your skills prominently, match your skills with the role profile, and use the headings that the profile uses, and provide evidence of how you've used your skills in real life situations. A slightly different type of CV that you might well have encountered is chronological CV. And this is quite a traditional CV format. It's structured in reverse chronological order, and list your most recent qualifications and experiences first. This type of CV template makes it very easy for employers to quickly identify good potential candidates, because it's very clear, it's just laid out there, and it allows you to provide clear details of your qualifications, your work history, your responsibilities, which match the criteria of a job description. And here's an example of one such. They tend to be a bit shorter, and you could use them for maybe if you were applying for a role that was for an internship, for example, where you just need to get the basic information out there. Another type of CV, depending on what you're going on to do at this point, is an academic CV. So you'd usually use this if you're going on to apply for further academic study. Maybe you're going to do a PhD or a doctorate or something like that, or maybe go into a new academic field, maybe a lecturing position or a research-based role. They differ from the CVs that we've already discussed in that they'll include sections on maybe publications that you've read or been part of, research activities and papers, teaching experience, or conferences you've attended, or presentations you've delivered. And so it will go into much more depth in these areas than you'd consider for a commercial opportunity that you might be applying for. So it's important to distinguish between the two. The key to this type of CV is to ensure that your writing style is scholarly, but that you can also be understood by someone reviewing your CV who maybe isn't a specialist in your technical field.
Liz,
and then, sorry,
Liz,
yes.
sorry, you know your sound, it keeps, when you move back, I think you keep going away from the mic, so it goes a bit, sound a bit different. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, shout if it happens again, please. So then we're looking at an industry-specific CV. So maybe for a particular sector, if you're applying maybe for law school or for a teaching position or the IT sector, for example. So here, this is a CV for somebody applying to law school. And the difference here is that this should reflect relevant work experience in the particular field that you're looking to go into. So relevant work experience, any pro bono work you've done, any vacation work, or relevant study you've done in this particular area. And then finally looking at video CVs, which to be honest, they're used less frequently. And I would say generally for customer facing roles, or maybe in the creative industries or marketing, sales, media, that type of environment. But the other thing is that you might actually be asked to do a piece to video as part of an application process. So you may have to do a CV, but also do a video application as well. And so it's worth thinking about this because I'm seeing it more and more, especially in the current climate where everything's been done remotely anyway. So remember, if you're asked to do a video CV, you aren't aiming to produce a Hollywood movie, but just to show an employer who you are and what value you can deliver to their business and their customers. There are lots of good examples of video CVs on YouTube, and if you want to have some links to these, I can send them to you if you're interested. So moving on to personal statements. What is a personal statement? Well, it's a concise paragraph or summary which details what you can bring to a job or to a company. It generally sits at the top of your CV, and it's your opportunity to really sell yourself to employers and highlight the relevant skills and experiences that you possess. It also gives you the chance to show off your strengths and to share your career goals. As we've already found out, employers might spend as little as 8 seconds looking at your CV. So a personal statement can give you an invaluable opportunity to make your application stand out and set yourself apart from the competition. If you're a graduate, I think it's advisable to focus on your educational background and achievements, the career path you're looking to follow, and to highlight any relevant experiences that make your application unique. In terms of length, I mean, be guided by the job application that you're following, but it probably shouldn't be much longer than 200 words or so, and comprise of a few short, well-constructed sentences. Make sure you keep it factual and to the point, and avoid statements that aren't backed up by your CV. And something else that I'd advise you, when you're writing both anything that you're using for your application, is to apply the so what test. And well, what do I mean by the so what test? Well, if someone reading your CV reads something you've written and they can shrug their shoulders and say, well, big deal, that doesn't really tell me anything about this person, then we failed the so what test. Everything you say should be adding to the body of knowledge the assessor is finding out about you, and adding to this compelling case to bring you in for an interview. So, for example, you might say you're a team player. Well, so what? Lots of us think of ourselves as team players, but how are you a team player? is this skill essential to the role you're applying for? If it is, then show how you're a team player. So for example, I've been a member of my college hockey team for 3 years. I've captained the team to win our last league season, our league last season. If you're applying for a role that's outside your current experience, you can use this introduction as a chance to tell the reader about the type of work you're looking for. For example, I'm ambitious to work in events, and for the last 3 years, I've been a member of our college events committee. Then detail what you can offer the company. Why are you suited to this particular role? Cover any relevant skills or experience. If you lack practical work experience, then instead draw attention to your academic or your extracurricular achievements, such as maybe working for your university or college newspaper, or which has developed your written communication skills, attention to detail and team working. And then conclude your personal statement by highlighting your career goals. So, for example, I'm looking to start my career in the exciting world of publishing and to develop the skills learned through my university studies and internships. So, in summary, tailor your personal statement and your CV in general to each application. Be honest, provide evidence of skills and experience, but remember, keep it brief and use the job description to help you formulate your profile and stick to the word limit. And one thing I'd also do is when you've done it, when you've constructed your personal statement, read it aloud to yourself to see if it flows. Because quite often things read differently when you do that. Don't copy and paste from your cover letter. You need to be adding something different here, and include unnecessary personal information like your age or your marital status or whatever that happens to be. And watch the language you use. Don't use cliches or jargon, or include quotes from others, and certainly don't ramble. So moving on to structure and format of your CV, mind your language. Watch the words you use. The words you use have impact. So really choose them carefully. I'd be mindful of your language. And for example, if you're applying for a job that has a job description, echo the phraseology that's in the job description. Look at the words they use and echo them back. Be concise. As I said before, don't ramble or provide unnecessary detail, and avoid jargon or slang or terms that might be unfamiliar to the reader, or too much technical detail that just will switch the reader off. And also remember your audience. You aren't talking to your friends, you're talking to a prospective employer. So as with any written communication, it's really important that we tailor our language appropriately. Looking at layout, I think this is as important as the content, because it's the visual impression your CV makes can either entice someone to read on or not. And they might not have even read a word that you've said. So they can reject it on that basis alone. So a really clear layout is important. And the template you choose should be striking and uncluttered. Although they might seem fun and eye-catching, I would probably avoid distracting sidebars and moving images. I know when I was a recruiter and looking at a lot of CVs, that would turn me off immediately. It's just it's gimmicky, particularly if you're applying for quite traditional roles, maybe in the law or the accountancy profession or professional services. The exception, I would say, is maybe if you're applying for positions in the creative industries or startups where a less formal approach is required, or there's a real value placed on creativity and innovation, and in which case, fine, that can be part of it. But as with all aspects of your CV, use your judgment, think about it, take your lead from the job spec and the website of the business that you're applying to, and adapt the presentation of your CV accordingly. What we're trying to avoid at all times is avoiding style over substance. I'd say the length of the CV should probably be around 2 pages, especially as you're just starting out in your career. The academic should be at the start, followed by your work experience, followed by interests and other experience and other information that you might want to add in. Using bullet points really breaks the CV up, and I think that's really good. It makes it easier to read and avoid big blocks of text, which are just quite chunky and impenetrable to the reader. So use plenty of white space. Be mindful of the fonts and the text size you use. Use a clear font, e.g. Calibri, but whatever you think is best, but make sure it's nice and clear and stick to one. It's really distracting if the font keeps changing, and a font size that can be easily read. I know these are quite small, but when you get your presentation afterwards, you'll be able to enlarge and read better. But I wanted to make sure I included lots of information here. So in real life, a font size of around about 10, or no less is recommended, and use normal sized margins. And if you're including a personal statement, use the same voice throughout, i.e. writing in the first or the third person. I tend to prefer the first, but that's my preference. And then what about your personal information and non-work academic details? So at the start of your CV, you should include contact details. You don't have to give a full address, that's not appropriate, but you should indicate where you're located, and also clear ways of contacting you. So a mobile phone number, an email address, but please be aware of your email address. If it's non-business or like an unprofessional, it won't go down well. So for example, if it's john@thecrazyclub.com or jane@partycentral.co, these are best avoided. Please change it to something professional, and make it clear also where you want to be located if this is different from your current location. Also include details on your interests and hobbies. That's great. It shows you as a rounded person. So any clubs you're a member of or activities you participate in, but make sure the balance is right. You know, if the CV is totally focused on this area, you could come across as being a bit lightweight and not focused on work. So, and also avoid saying things like, I spend most of my time in the pub or watching Netflix as your key leisure pursuits. You know, you need to get the balance right. But there again, as I said earlier, it's all about judgment. I think it's also really, really important to consider your social media footprint. Where do you show up on social media? LinkedIn, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the obvious platform for business. And I know yesterday, Jacqueline's session, she looked at how you could structure your LinkedIn profile and how you should use that. And employers will certainly look at it, as Jacqueline said, but potential employers will also often look at your social media feeds generally. So if you're on Instagram or Facebook or anything else, is your account private? And if it's not, what will a potential employer see? And I'd really urge you to look at that because it can create all sorts of problems for you. Referees. All CVs should have mention of referees. You don't have to include the names of them on there, but just say that they're available on request. But who should you ask? Well, the first rule with potential referees is to make sure that you do ask them. It's really important that you get their permission. It's just a courtesy and it's polite to ask somebody. Usually it should be someone who knows you in a professional or an academic setting, so an employer, a lecturer, or a teacher. And quite often you'll be asked for a personal reference too, so not a relative, but a family friend perhaps, or someone from a club or activity you belong to, or maybe a church or something like that. Photos. Opinion is very divided on this. And there again, I think Jacqueline mentioned this about LinkedIn yesterday. Whether photos should be on a CV, it's quite often it's open to debate. And I think it really comes down to the type of photo you're going to use. It can give the assessor a really good sense of you as a person and bring the CV alive. However, as with LinkedIn, it needs to be professional and appropriate, not you on holiday or in a bar. And so remember what we spoke about at the very beginning of this webinar. It's all about impact and impression. So if you're going to use a photo, choose one that works for you, not against you. So coming on to the cover letter, writing a cover letter these days is almost part of almost every job application. So you have to make sure, again, that it sells your skills and experience and your abilities, but also it needs to be clear and concise, and persuades the reader that they would like to meet you. First thing I would say is really important is do your research. And this goes for the whole application process, both for your CV and your cover letter. Take some time to look at the role you're applying for and the company, and use this information to tailor your cover letter accordingly. Once you've done your research, you'll then be able to make clear in your cover letter how your skills and abilities match up to what the employer is looking for. Doing your research will give you the knowledge of how to tailor your application and also the style of the company, but it also demonstrates that you've got a real interest in the specific role and that company. So formatting a cover letter, well, it should be well presented, concise, to the point, easy to read font. I'd use the same one that you've used in your CV. And as with that, don't get carried away with any embellishments like pictures and word art. Obviously, you have to make sure it's written in clear paragraphs. It should also be the right length. So too long and you'll risk rambling or boring the recruiter, and too short, you won't have covered everything. So aim for about half a side of A4, 1 page absolute maximum, and you'll be on the right track. Addressing the cover letter, well, it should be addressed to the person dealing with the applications. And usually this will be shown on the job advert. But if it isn't, you can always go away and find that out. It's not too difficult to do so. And if you do manage to find a name, address this with, sounds obvious, but dear Mr. Smith or dear Ms. Jones. And if you can't find a name, then dear sir or madam is perfectly fine. It might sound very obvious, but these are points that people sometimes miss. There aren't any set rules as to how you structure a cover letter, but make sure it flows. So the opening paragraph, why are you getting in touch? It should be short, to the point, and explain why you're getting in touch. It's useful to include maybe where you found the advert or where the job application was. So whether it's on LinkedIn or a recruitment company or what have you. And if someone's referred you to the job, then make sure you mention that in this opening section. So, for example, I wish to apply for the role as IT manager, currently being advertised on reed.co.uk. Please find enclosed my CV for your consideration. And then, why are you suitable for the job? So briefly explain your professional and academic qualifications that are relevant to the role, and ensure you refer to the skills listed in the job description. So, for example, as you can see from my attached CV, I've over 3 years experience in the IT industry, and I believe the knowledge and skills built up during this time make me a perfect candidate for this role. And then what can you do for the company? Now it's your opportunity to emphasize what you can do for them. Outline your career goals, expand on pertinent points in your CV, include examples of your skills. So, for example, in my current role as Senior Marketing Executive at software company X, I've been responsible for increasing incoming client inquiries for our B2B product lines by 156% in under 12 months, which helped the business increase its revenue by 55% year on year. So really specific examples. And then reiterate why you're interested in this role and why you think you're a good fit for it. And a good time also to indicate you'd like to meet them, be upfront about that. So, for example, I'm confident that I can bring this level of success with me to your company and help IT Company Limited build upon their reputation as one of the UK's fastest growing software houses. With my previous expertise and experience, I believe I can start actively contributing to the business as soon as possible. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to meeting with you to discuss my application further. So really simple, but just bringing it all together at the end. And then sign off there again, be mindful of this. It's yours sincerely if you know the name of the hiring manager, and yours faithfully if you don't, and then followed by your name. So that's the cover letter. And then finally, things to avoid. What should you be looking at that you really, really shouldn't do in your CV or your cover letter? And the first of those, and the most obvious, is spelling mistakes. There is absolutely no excuse. Please use your spell check. I know employers, prospective employers will literally rip up a CV if there's a spelling mistake in it. Doesn't matter how brilliant you are. So please avoid doing that. Be honest. Lying on a CV is an offence, and believe me, untruths are very easily found out and they quickly come to light, and you could have a job offer withdrawn if there's something that's found that you haven't been truthful about. And I've seen that happening many times. So be mindful of that. Overselling yourself. Don't oversell yourself. You don't need to. Don't brag or pretend you've got more experience than you've got, or claim to be an expert in something when you've been doing a job for about 5 minutes. You know, humble confidence, I'd say, is the word you want to use, not arrogance. That's the tone you're looking for. You don't want to come across as arrogant or a bit of a know-it-all. Lack of clarity. Don't lump all your experiences into one, or don't make sure you put them in a logical order, a logical sequence. The CV should really navigate a really clear path through your experiences and each job or phase of your life identified very clearly and separately. As I've mentioned before, don't use too many distracting images or links or just unnecessary bells and whistles. Remember what we've said about style over substance. Avoid a confusing layout. Which includes things like sidebars. They just act as a distraction, especially if they don't actually add anything of consequence. Too much unnecessary detail or waffle. The assessor will just switch off, and this should be a taster of you and what you can do. An invitation, if you like, for someone to find out more about you in person at an interview. It isn't the place to write your life story. I think a real mistake is a failing to tailor your application to the job in hand, and lack of evidence. Making those generic empty statements on a CV, it's a big switch off. We can all say we've got good communication skills, but what does that actually mean? We need to find a way to demonstrate our good communication skills with evidence-based examples. So try and remember that. And ignoring gaps in your work history. Gaps are fairly common, and it's just usually not a problem at all, as long as you can explain why there's a gap. There's no shame at all in explaining that you've had to take time out to look after a sick relative, or that you were traveling or volunteering. That's all great. So the problem really only ever arises if you try and fudge it, or make excuses. The employer will immediately become suspicious, and you could lose out. So try and account for any gaps in your CV and be ready to explain them either at interview or maybe in a cover letter. So in summary, there's a lot to think about when you're doing your CV and your cover letter. And I'd say after you've finished it and you've read it all through and you've looked at how it's formatted and you've checked for your spelling mistakes, come back to the opening of this webinar today and the 3 I's. Have you introduced yourself effectively? Have you made a positive impression? And will you leave a lasting impact? And any questions?
Thanks very much for that, Liz. I pick up new tips every time to pass on to our students. Yes, we have had a few questions.
Okay.
So let me go in the order they received. So your photo on a CV, is it a good idea to add it? I know you've already mentioned this in your presentation.
Yes. I mean, you know, as I say, I think it really depends on the actual photo. So if it's professional, it's you're wearing professional clothes, it suits the role that you're applying for, then yes, by all means include one. But don't just pick any old one that you might have on your phone or something and say, oh, that'll do. And actually, you know, it's you on holiday, or you leaning up against a bar, or you know, whatever. Just be mindful of the audience. So yeah, it's lovely to see what someone looks like, but just make sure you tailor it accordingly.
Great, thank you. And then would you recommend any software / templates that somebody can use for CV writing?
There are lots out there on, if you go on to Google them, companies, big recruitment companies tend to have quite a few different templates on them. So I think people like Reed, I'm just thinking off the top of my head what other recruiters there are, but you know, the big recruitment companies. But if you just Google CV templates, then lots will come up. Some are paid for, and I don't pay for them. You don't need to pay for them, but you could take any, when you get through this summary from today through, you could use any of those as a template. And if you're not coming up with anything, then message me through Shahida, and I'll find some for you. But there are templates out there. All I would say, as I've mentioned a number of times, is make sure you tailor your template accordingly. Don't just blindly follow it if actually it doesn't work for you. So make sure you use one that's appropriate.
Great, yeah, no, good point. Is it a good idea to add your date of birth on your CV? When I've reviewed some in the past, I've seen sometimes some CVs have them on them. Is that the norm anymore?
It's not a requirement anymore, and actually you shouldn't. You know, because we live in an age where you can't have age discrimination, and so you know, putting your date of birth on your CV, it just feeds into that, and could be a stick with which to beat at some point. So leave it off. You know, in reality, an employer can probably work out your age from your CV, because they can look at what you've done and when. But no, we don't advise people to put their date of birth on the CV anymore. It's not appropriate, because you know, people shouldn't rule you in or out according to your age. It's about your abilities for the job.
Yeah, very true. Another question is, where do you address the gap on your CV?
It really depends what it is. I would make, in your the body of the CV, I would probably make mention, so don't have a, you know, say it's a 2-year gap. I would include those 2 years and write something brief about why you had the gap. But it may be something you might want to either explain a little bit more, or make reference to the fact that you want to, you know, you can give further information if required, or refer to it in your cover letter as well. Don't just have a big gap with nothing there, because people will think, have they got their dates wrong? So say you had 2 years out because you were traveling, or say you had to, as I mentioned in the presentation, you had to look after an elderly relative or someone who was ill or something like that, then you know, you can put those dates in and say whatever it was in short form, and you know, happy to provide further details if required, because you don't want to, maybe if it was something personal, you might not want to go into huge amounts of written detail on your CV, but you also want to make sure someone knows you're not hiding something.
Yeah,
so
very true.
That's how I would handle it. You can, and then you can talk about it more in person, because some things aren't relevant to include loads of detail on.
Yeah, I know. I remember receiving a CV and it had like a gap, a huge gap, but they put like literally 2 lines that, oh, I took time up to bring up my children. Another person had put, you know, they needed to take time up for their health, but they're fine now, etc., etc. So, you know, if there's an explanation.
Exactly. Exactly, and then a prospective employer can ask you for more detail, either face to face or before they meet you, and you can go into more detail at that point. So that would be what I would do. But trying to pretend it isn't there doesn't really help, because someone will come back to it.
And if they're a good employer, that's what they will be doing as well.
Exactly. And people are very understanding about situations that can arise. Everyone has things that happen in their life that weren't necessarily anticipated or planned for. And it quite often it says an awful lot about you that you were able to deal with that situation, and now you're in the situation that you are bouncing back, or whatever it happens to be. So you can actually use it to your advantage.
Yeah, true. Okay, I've got another one. Should you list your grades for all your education?
The further you go away from them, the less you need to list them. So for example, once you've done your degree, yes, include your degree qualification. You can, if you've done A levels or something, equivalent, you can put those in. But I wouldn't do every mortal qualification beyond that. It's enough to say you've got, if you've whatever you've done, GCSEs or whatever it is, that you've got those, you've got X number. If it's relevant, you've got maths and English if that's relevant to the application that you're going for. But you do not have to list every single mortal qualification you've ever got, because it would just take up too much space.
With your GCSEs, is it enough to say, I don't know, you've got 5 GCSE passes and then you've got your English and maths? Because that was what I used to do back in the day.
Absolutely.
Then it didn't take too much room up.
Exactly fine. That's perfectly fine to do that. And as I say, the further you go away from them, the less relevant it becomes, because they're the building blocks for you to go on to your next phase of education. So you don't need to include that detail. It's just enough to say that you've got them. That's absolutely fine.
Great. Well, if you've got any more questions, you can pop them in the chat, because we're going to be concluding the session in a minute as well. Yeah, the questions have been really great today, actually. I hope you've learned picked up some tips from there. Oh, this is a good question. Is education valued over skill?
Oh, that's a very good question. I like that question. And yeah, I'm going to slightly say it sort of depends on what you're applying for. So I think in many instances, actually, if you can demonstrate you can do the job, you've got the right skills and attributes, it really doesn't matter so much if you haven't got the academic qualifications, because actually, as an employer, you want someone who can do the job or can learn on the job or train. And so, yes, academic skill experience can be very good for certain things, and clearly it's a great thing to have. Quite often, if you can demonstrate that you can do a job through your own skills, your own strengths, your own experiences, that's enough. And that's why I think it's really important, when you're starting out, before you launch into your CV, really think about what your skills and strengths are. And there's lots of, I mean, if you want to have some sort of template, I can send you something. There's lots online, tests you can do, so that you can think about what your skills and experiences are. If you don't have the academics, fine, show how you can do something in another way. It shows you're resourceful as well, that you can think laterally. What you've got.
Yeah, true. And then someone's mentioned that they do a lot of training with regards to their work. Is it a good idea to list them? If you do like choking awareness or medicine administration, is it good to list those?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. I would always include any on the job training that you've done, or anything that adds to the body of experience that you've got. And it shows that you've got that sort of, employers love to see people with a growth mindset, that they are prepared to push themselves outside of their job, to learn other things, to learn other skills, always developing. And that's, that's something that takes you through your whole career. And so the fact that you can show that you've already started on that process and you're willing to learn and develop, I think is a really good thing. So yes, I would definitely include them.
Yeah, and on that note, just keep a note of all the training that you're doing, because as you enter the world of work, if you haven't already, you forget all the training, because you get a lot of on-job working as well.
Absolutely.
And you just forget to make
You do. I totally agree with you, Shahida. That's a really good point, and it's something that comes up a lot with people that I coach. Is that quite often they move on to the next thing and they forget what they've done. So I would keep yourself a little spreadsheet somewhere of training courses that you've done, as Shahida says, absolutely, and also achievements that you've in your role, any work experience, anything you've achieved, participated in, projects you've been involved in, anything at all that adds to that body of experience, because you're absolutely right, you do forget, and then you come back to, maybe you want to change jobs in a couple of years time, or what have you, and it's a real effort then to go back and think, oh, what did I do then, when? So yeah, keep yourself a little spreadsheet, and it really does help, and it boosts your confidence, because you say, I've done that.
Very true. And some of our winners have actually put on their LinkedIn profile and CV that they were awarded a HKF bursary as well. So that's something you might consider as well.
Absolutely. Anything like that, anything that makes people say, oh, that's a bit different, or that's interesting, or they've achieved something, anything that takes it out of the bland and catches the attention for the right reasons. You absolutely include anything like that. Don't hide these things. They showcase what you are.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to send us the CV for them to look at, or for us to look over there, as a critical friend, I always call it critical friend, is friendly advice.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, I'm very happy to review any CVs as well. If anyone wants to send them through, more than happy to do that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much, Liz, for today. We'll probably see you at next year's event when we're running Career Ready Week.
I'm very happy to do so. Lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for all of us that you've joined, participants who've joined us today. Excellent questions, really, really good. So thank you very much, and we shall see you soon. Bye-bye.